Hi, we are with Alyn Ware. Today is the 20th of May, 2015. My name is Seyn Laproyen.
Yeah, I'm Florindo T.
I want to first make it official that I met Alyn many years ago, easily more than 15, may have been 94, 95. We worked in the same office for a while. In all this time, I never asked him in detail what was going on at the UN or with the representatives of this government or that government. I'm hoping that he knew from the beginning that I am not impressed with nation states or the United Nations, and I'm basically anti-statist, and when Alyn introduced me, he never mentioned those. He probably assumed that it wouldn't be a good introduction, but in any event, I'm hoping that he was aware of this, and I never tried to hide it. I also gave him summaries before, some documents that I wrote. I don't think he read any of them, and maybe that was prudent on his part. But in any event, I do want to state here that I also gave him a short document about a nontheistic religion that I advocate for, and that happens to place much emphasis on nuclear weapons and nuclear technology as one of the first evils that we have to confront. When I say we, of course, this has to be interfaith. And in this context, there's something that I heard that even planners in the United States recognize the possibility that nuclear weapons may outlast the states to which they belong, or some of them anyway. Obviously, in our lifetime, we saw the disintegration of the USSR, but obviously both the technology and the consequences of bad use of the technology can be longer lasting than any state has lasted so far or any empire lasted so far. So thinking of these and knowing how the idea of nationalism is relatively recent, some people at least floated the idea that only a religion can be one of the safer, let's say, sources of opposition to nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, most of the dominant religions know nothing about, or, they were obviously started long before nuclear technology. So I don't mind making it official that, in my religion, nuclear weapons are definitely against the core values that people from different faith groups should adhere to or try to adhere to. One thing that I think we should contemplate is that obviously states have it within their power to delay a lot of the things that they can easily do. When I first met you in the early 90s, I don't think any state has good enough excuses not to get rid of nuclear weapons. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that nuclear weapons do violate the core principles that religions are based on. Those core principles are respect for each other, reciprocity. I treat others as you would have them treat you. Nuclear weapons don't fit into that. Do you want people to threaten to blow you up with nuclear weapons? No, so you shouldn't threaten to blow people up with nuclear weapons. There are the core principles of the different religious faiths, such as guardianship of creation, and violating creation with nuclear weapons, and the fact that the catastrophic consequences of them not only can damage the environment now but for subsequent generations, also violates the principle of intergenerational equity. The idea that we should be helping provide for our children in the future, not threatening their future. So I would agree. Nuclear weapons violate the basic principles upon which the major religions are based. Not the dogma, because the dogma is how that's expressed through the way people do things, but the basic core principles. That's why Religions for Peace has brought out a book, which I helped them produce, saying that nuclear weapons violate the principles of religions, and going through that aspect. I think nuclear weapons violate the basic principles of international law. And those principles of international law, particularly, relating to warfare. One, I think warfare is illegal. The UN Charter affirms that sort of, but gives a little exception. So it's not perfect. But in particular, even if there is fighting, civilians are protected under international law, and nuclear weapons violate that. They are indiscriminate. Mm-hmm. So against the principles of religions, against international law. With regards to nation states, well, that's a human construct. We have devised the ways of managing our relations, but none of that was inherent. And so nation states at the moment is one of the major operating aspects of international law and international mechanisms. But more and more, there's the idea of global common good, common humanity, global citizenship, that transcends the idea of nation state. More and more we see that most of the systems on earth cannot be bound in nation state pockets. And it's a principle that's been around for a long time, but now more and more I think people are starting to realise that. I don't think the nation state is going to go away tomorrow, but I do see that there is a lot more nuanced interaction of individuals, of smaller communities, of regions, of states, of bigger regions, and then of international. And there's going to be some sort of balance of all those different aspects, and we'll have constructs at different levels. So the nation state will go down in value, international cooperation will elevate, as will individual freedom, because the state is sort of like blocks. If you concentrate just on the state, it blocks at the bottom level individual freedoms, because the state is dictating what's happening, and the other level it prevents the global cooperation or global citizenship. So I think it's going to erode. I don't think it'll go away straight away, and I think we will have a more nuanced governance that will provide for both individual rights and also for international solidarity and global citizenship.
What I tried to get at, the first question was, starting from the early 90s, as far as I can see, states had no good reason to hold on to nuclear weapons. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Cold War could have been put an end to, but it wasn't. And you may have your own interpretation of who was guiltier at this, but in any event, of course, it's not an original idea, and perhaps we should also note that May is easily about 70 years into the end of the war in Europe. Mm-hmm. So this could have been an easy time for people working on the Manhattan Project 70 years ago to say, well, we were working on this so that Hitler couldn't do it before us, so it's time to stop. But they didn't. Mm-hmm. There was one person, Joseph Rotblat, who stopped being part of it. So if he could have done it, I guess other people could have done it too, but they chose not to. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was known, we hear now, late 1944, that Hitler's nuclear program was scrapped. So it is already more than 70 years, and whatever the states do today, we can say is almost more than 70 years too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would agree with you with regards to there is no justification, no rational justification for holding on to nuclear weapons. I would argue even during the Cold War they were illegal, immoral, insane, and contributed to the conflict in the Cold War rather than prevented Cold War conflict spilling out. The Cold War did spill out. I mean, there were conflicts during the Cold War. There were a lot of proxy wars. The nuclear weapons did not stop those. But if you hold on to the notion that, well, at least the nuclear weapons prevented the two big power blocks from having a third world war, then quite rightly the nuclear weapons should have gone at the end of the Cold War. I think it was part of that thinking, that Gorbachev managed to convince Ronald Reagan, once they could manage a working relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States, then Ronald Reagan agreed with Gorbachev, we can get rid of these nuclear weapons. But they had too many vested interests and people wanting to hold on to them, and also because, there are multiple reasons for holding on to the nuclear weapons. And a lot of it is to do with power plays and not whether they're actually required for security. A lot more is power projection, a lot more is like the political status, and a lot more is the vested interests of those making the weapons. And so those are other aspects which we have to deal with, as well as the whole rationale of whether they are suitable for security or not.